Coming up on Wrestling Life.
You can be as nice as you can to everybody and shake everybody's hand, but there will always be somebody who looks at you like you've been given a gift to be here. Like you didn't do what I did. And it's a case by case basis. Maybe sometimes they're right, maybe sometimes they're wrong, but you can't please everybody. And I've learned that very, very early that you just got to do what you got to do. You can't please everybody because everybody's going to find a reason, if they want to not like you, to root against you in a legitimate sense.
Welcome to Wrestling Life with Ben Veal, the show that features real talk from real talent.
Hello and welcome to Wrestling Life with Ben Veal. This is the show that aims to tell the real stories behind those that have positively shaped wrestling's past, present and future. And joining me today is a very special guest who is bridging two eras. Before I get to that, a very quick request. We need you to help us grow. This is a very new show and it needs your help to make the biggest impact possible. So please subscribe, follow our socials at Wrestling Life Online, leave a 5-star review, tell a friend and let us know what you think using our hashtag WrestlingLifePod. Now, joining me today is a second generation wrestling talent who is focused on making a name for himself in his own right. He is the son of WWE Hall of Famer Arn Anderson. He's spent the last 2 years as part of the AEW roster, and now he's focused on the next chapter of his wrestling career. It is my pleasure to welcome to Wrestling Life today, Brock Anderson. Brock, thanks for joining me today. How are you, sir?
Good, Ben. How are you, sir? I appreciate you having me on today.
I am very well, and I'm appreciating how festive your backdrop is as well. We're recording this at the start of December, and you are ready for Christmas.
Yeah, we got an early jump on it over here.
It's funny because, of course, filming here in the UK, we have a very different setup. We don't have any of the Thanksgiving kind of countdown that you guys do. It's like you get 2 holidays in a month.
So when do y'all start? I never even thought about that.
Yeah, we just don't have that. We kind of start getting festive now, whereas you've already had your turkey and you've already had one big holiday. We missed one.
Okay.
I feel quite shortchanged being in the UK, actually, thinking about it. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. I didn't even think about that until I think when you reached out, you were like, "How does Thursday sound?" I was like, "Ben, Thursday is Thanksgiving." I was like, "We can't do that." And then that was just the different cultures. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, no, just passed us by. You were at WrestleCade, weren't you, over Thanksgiving weekend?
Yes, sir. Did Thanksgiving Thursday, and then it's only 80 miles up from Charlotte. So every weekend or every year, that's such a big weekend for us, such a good weekend, such a great area. That event has become so big. I mean, there has to be, I don't know what the foot traffic is, but it has to be in tens of the thousands. And
wow,
people over at AML that do that have really grown that event really big. And it's become one of the premier events of the year, probably top 3 at least on the independent scene, at least.
Looks like it brings in every single name you can possibly think of, really.
Oh, yeah. Anybody that's not tied down, some people that are tied down, I don't know their situations, but I know last year when we were with AEW, there was a lot of us there. There weren't as much this year. I'm sure that's starting to become more of a thing where the contract guys don't do it as much, but it's such a fun weekend just to see everybody and all old faces and people you share locker rooms with and past companies. It's fun. It's always a good time.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole convention thing, because that wrestling convention idea still feels like it's quite new. Like in comparison, like that kind of opportunity for independent talent to meet the fans, work some matches, have that experience. And it's, as a fan, it's an incredible thing to be a part of. But I imagine as a talent also, as you say, when you're in between major promotions, must be great to have that opportunity as well to network and to get to know others within the industry.
Oh, for sure. Networking. And there's 3-4 matches that entire weekend. So if you're not tied down, it's a great place to get a bunch of reps in 2 days in front of maybe the most people they've wrestled in front of.
Yeah, absolutely. So where are you? We're recording this in December 2023. Where are you currently, Brock, in terms of your status right now with your wrestling career?
So I was My contract with All Elite Wrestling ended at the end of August, I believe. I think maybe the first day of September. I can't remember. I was offered an extension. It was not to my liking. I don't know if that's the standard protocol. I've seen other people say that they were offered a similar contract. Just where I'm at in my career, it was not a money issue. It was simply getting reps. And the contract I had with them did not allow me to get enough reps, I thought, at this early stage. So that's why I sent them back a counter. Never heard from them. And then 6 weeks later, I was told that I was released, which was news to me because I was already under the impression that I was a free agent. So that was an interesting phone call.
Okay. So when you say about getting reps in, so your focus right now then is getting as many matches under your belt and as much in-ring experience as you can in front of crowds. Is that right?
Live matches, I think the bulk of my matches when I was there would become on the dark tapings in Orlando. So we would go down there and film several shows in the span of about 2 days down at Universal Studios. So that would be a bulk of where I would get my reps. But even those reps were short 3 to 5 minute matches, which is hard to get better in this line of work because it's especially in tag scenarios, which was mostly between me and Lee and then me and Brian later. It's just not a great opportunity to get better in that short time frame and the way that's set up. And once they did away with that, because there was some sort of TV deal, I don't know the details on that. Somebody wanted to own something. They did away with that. They brought in the ROH. I was under the impression the ROH would be kind of the same thing. I think it was for a little bit, and now they've geared it almost to another TV. So they've put bigger stars on that as well. And with the intro, we also started doing house shows. If you remember, there was probably only 4 or 5 of them. And then we got the Saturday show. So it became a place where there was just strictly TV. And that's a great place if you're a veteran and you've been around and you know what you're doing. That's a great setup. But for me, when I'm still learning and the opportunity to not get those reps became a huge factor. So when my contract came up, I didn't feel the need to sign that extension. I felt it was more important to bet on myself and just go see what's out there. Get as many reps as possible, wherever, whenever, however many different companies, whatever. Just see what's out there. And at WrestleCade, I had a couple interesting conversations that I think will be very positive in that development.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I watched your arrival in AEW of interest and followed your career over the last couple of years. I mean, you obviously had, a very high profile debut in that tag match with Cody Rhodes and, getting the win in your debut. Like, what are your memories like of your arrival in AEW?
Well, you skipped over a part. The match, I felt I did my part, and I had guys in there that helped carry me and made me look like I was adequate. The part you skipped over was my actual debut. And so for reference, this was during COVID era.
Yep.
So there was no fans. So we would have all the extras out in the audience as the fans.
Yep.
So I'd been there. I think I had my tryout in February and I'd signed. And for the first 6 months, I was just supposed to be out there and watch every match. That was my job. That was my job description, and just wait to be called. So every 2 weeks, I'd be out there in the crowd watching all these matches. And we would go from like 3 or 4 in the afternoon to 2 a.m. at night. Sometimes it was brutal. Wow. It was a lot of guys got hurt later because it wasn't a good setup. But I understood why they had to do it. They had to do content, but it was just a lot. So I would be sitting out there, and every time I was new, so I would be wearing it's in Jacksonville, Florida, so it's muggy. So I'd be wearing polo shirt, but I'd also be wearing like super short shorts and loafers because it was hot.
Yeah.
And, I wanted to be comfortable. I wasn't wearing jeans or anything like that. So it comes time, just one day in June, I think Cody came up and he's like, how do you feel about debuting tonight? And I was like, that's pretty short notice, but yeah, what are you going to say? And he'd be like, no,
Yeah.
I don't, I'm not feeling it, Cody. So he's like, yeah. He's like, what do you got to wear? I was looking down. I got this. And he's like, oh, keep in mind, it's not what I ended up wearing. He's like, you need, I'm going to send somebody to go to the store for you. What size polo do you wear? And I'm like, about an XL, maybe a large. He's like, all right, we're going to do a medium. Because in his mind, the idea behind it was Cody's such a fan of the business. He was thinking of my dad in those Horseman promos with the tight polo across the chest, and the arms were all jacked up and everybody was looking good with the watches and the glasses. So that's what he had in his mind. He wanted a really tight polo on me. So he sends somebody off the store. They get this creamsicle orange polo. I never wear orange. It looks terrible.
I don't think anyone could pull off orange.
No, unless you got maybe dark hair, maybe, but like blonde, no go. So he's like, all right, wear that. I'm like, okay. So they do the big queue up. I don't remember how they exactly did it, but Cody sets me up and I walk out, and it's the least intimidating debut probably in the history of pro wrestling. I'm sitting there wearing these short ass shorts, loafers, and this orange polo. And I didn't even fill it out like I think Cody wanted me to fill it out. And I think all my buddies at home, I had hyped up my debuting tonight, and a couple of them told me that they told their buddies that they're like, this is my boy, like he's debuting.
Yeah. And
when I came out, I guess a couple of them said, the buddies said to my friends, they're like, well, where is he? Is he coming out? Who's this guy? Is he? So, and I saw all the fallout on the internet of me just getting roasted from everything looking like a pool boy to a caddy to a yacht club guy. And I think it might be up there behind Shockmaster as one of the least executed debuts of all time. But the match the next week I thought was great. The opportunity to tag with Cody in that spot, to debut on on national TV. I'd never had a match before that. I was just practicing, never in front of people. But for a guy of his stature at that time, and even more so now, knowing what he did leaving there, is pretty cool for him to be like, you know what, I'll tag with you, your debut match. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think, what you're describing there is, you've got the challenge, haven't you? Because you're not just coming in as a new wrestler to a company, you are coming in as Arn Anderson's son. And so what you're describing there with the whole, let's live on the legacy of the Horseman and let's pay homage to that era. I imagine coming in as a second generation wrestler in many ways, I'm sure there's been many advantages in terms of what you've learnt from your dad, but it must also be hard, the fact that the shoes that you've got to fill in fans' eyes.
I don't really think of it a lot. Somebody always has to ask me that question like you did. It's not something I just walk around thinking about 24/7.
No.
And I think it also puts a spotlight on you in the locker room. You can be as nice as you can to everybody and shake everybody's hand, but there will always be somebody who looks at you like you've been given a gift to be here. Like you didn't do what I did. And it's a case by case basis. Maybe sometimes they're right, maybe sometimes they're wrong, but you can't please everybody. And I've learned that very, very early, that you just got to do what you got to do. You can't please everybody, because everybody's going to find a reason, if they want to not like you, to root against you in a legitimate sense.
Yeah. Did you always want to be a wrestler, or is that something growing up that you weren't keen on?
Well, so I was born February of 1997. My dad had his neck surgery, I think, a little bit after I was born. It may have been March to fuse his neck. And he was working on a comeback. I think when I was just a couple months old, he was working on it. And he thought he was going to come back. And a couple instances at the gym, I won't say it because he's said it 15,000 times on different platforms, but a couple instances at the gym and just walking around everyday life, he realized that if he steps back into that ring, it could be either he's in a wheelchair or a death sentence. And I think looking at me being a couple months old, he made the decision to step out. So in August, he retired on Nitro, that Nitro speech. So I say all that to say I didn't know my dad as a wrestler. I knew he was a wrestler in a past life. But when I was coming up, he just worked for WWE and WCW. He was just, I didn't really know what he did, but I just knew he worked there and he worked for a wrestling company and he was a wrestler. So my whole life, basically that I can remember, my dad worked for WWE. He was on the road. He'd be on the road Sunday to Wednesday. He'd come home. He'd unpack his bag, throw it in the laundry. He'd maybe hang out with us for a couple hours. He'd go up, sleep. He would sleep through the next day, all Thursday, basically. And then sometimes he would have to be out Friday for a house show loop. Sometimes he might get that Friday off, maybe a Saturday off, but that was very rare. So he was on the road all the time. So, but occasionally, depending where it was, like if they did a loop in Florida, he would bring us with him and we would book like a vacation around it. So we would go with him to the towns and we'd go to all the matches. And then if there was a 3 or 4 day stretch, we'd find somewhere nearby, go to the beach. Or if they were in Charlotte or anywhere in the Carolinas, anywhere drivable, we would go with them sometimes. So I went to hundreds of events over the course of my young life. So it was just, I don't know how to say it to people outside the bubble, but it was normal to me. It was like your dad's an auto mechanic and his dad was an auto mechanic before him. And you grow up in the shop and it just becomes normal. It just becomes part of your fabric, part of the family. So it was always very normal in this household. We always talked about it. It was always on, whether it was Monday, Tuesdays, or whatever days they shifted to, Wednesdays, Thursdays, whatever product, TNA, WWE, it was on. We just watched it. But like any other, get back to the original question. I mean, when you're a kid, you want to be 18 different things. You want to be, one week you want to be a cop, one week you want to be a firefighter, one week you want to be a football player, one week you want to be a baseball player. You know, when you're 5, 6, 7, you don't know what you want to be. Wrestler was thrown in there too. I'd wrestle. My buddies had trampoline 2 houses up. We'd get up there and wrestle all the time. Usually it would end up somebody getting hurt, of course. But I think the moment it became clear that this is what I want to do, I've said this somewhere else, I can't remember where, but my favorite, believe it or not, of all time is Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels. Okay. You would never know that watching my style. I'm not doing a bunch of super kicks and anything like that. I'm not nipping up. But he was, when I watched, you could tell he was different. You could tell he was special. Not even knowing anything about the business, you knew that guy was the best. And he was always my favorite. But I think the defining moment for me was WrestleMania. Like I said, WrestleMania, there was a time where they would allow the agents and all the employees to bring their families. They treated it like a big vacation. So every year we went to WrestleMania. And like everything else, that you get numb to it and it becomes normal. Not you almost take it for granted. You're like, yeah, okay, we're going to WrestleMania this year, whatever.
This episode of Wrestling Life is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Legacy Sports Nutrition. Take your physical and mental performance to the next level with Test X9, the natural testosterone booster. Clinically proven, Test X9 from Legacy Sports Nutrition is NSF certified, third-party lab tested, and made in the US of A. And it's brought to you by friends of the show, 3-time world champion Nick Aldis and 10-time world champion Mickie James. Nick developed and uses these products himself, so you know they work, and he shows you how over at legacysupps.com, with links to clinical studies on each of the 9 key ingredients. No bull, no bro science, just facts. It's time to level up your strength, energy, libido and drive now with Test X9 from Legacy Sports Nutrition. And if you want to really level up, go for the ultimate test stack, adding T-Assist, a pro-grade estrogen inhibitor and test enhancer, and the best-selling sleep aid Recovery PM, and discover why improving your sleep is the key to unlocking your mental and physical potential. So stop settling for average. Go to legacysupps.com now and use the promo code WrestlingLife for 10% off your entire order. That's promo code WrestlingLife. And if you subscribe to have it shipped every 30 days, you can still get the discount every single time. So head on over now to legacysupps.com and level up with Legacy.
And I was about 12, so I'm in that stage where you just don't care and you're rebellious and everything. You think you know everything. So this is also the time frame where these WrestleManias are getting very long. Mm-hmm. They're having like 3 or 4 hour pre-shows. It's getting, by the time you get to even like the semi-main, it's been 6 hours.
Yeah.
It's the WrestleMania 25 in Houston. We'd been going for probably 4 hours at this point. And I'm already losing interest. I'm like, all right, okay, whatever. And all of a sudden I see this video package take place and this white like platform descends from the arena top.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what's going on here? And you see the smoke and everything, and you look and it's Shawn Michaels, and he's coming down from the heavens. And then he walks to the ring, he does his whole thing, and then Taker comes out. Complete opposite, heaven and hell. And they go out there and have that match. And I remember I was sitting there playing on like my Nintendo DS just to kill the time. And I put my DS down and I watched every minute of that match. And I thought it was the best thing. The way they had the people in the palm of their hands with every waking move, there was no wasted movement. Everything they did had purpose. I was watching that match. I was like, okay, I think this is actually a possibility. I think this is actually what I want to do. And I think since that match, it's become pretty well stated that may have been one of the best matches of all time. I don't know where you rank it, but it's definitely up there in some form or fashion.
It's got to be one of the top 3 WrestleMania matches, if not the top. Incredible.
I felt very lucky that I was there to see it in person. That's how I felt at the time, and that's even more how I feel now.
And have you had an opportunity, because I guess that, the difference between your upbringing and your road into wrestling compared to some is that you would have had a chance, I assume, with your dad being an agent, to meet a lot of those talents and to talk about those matches. Was that your experience growing up? You were allowed to have much more time backstage, or was it still very much you were a fan looking in on the product?
Oh, I was backstage a lot. And, the guys that were there long periods of time, I knew pretty well. Even up to like AEW, some of them were working, and it was that I think they probably felt weird that I was in that spot now, because they'd known me since I was a kid, whether it was like Dean Malenko or Dustin Rhodes or the Big Show when he came in, or like Mark Henry, all these guys that knew me when I was probably 3-4 years old. Yeah. I'm sure it was kind of trippy for them.
Probably made them feel really old.
Yeah. God, I hope not. They could still go, though. That's all that matters.
Yeah. So did you ever have a period where, wrestling was just escapist for you before you were kind of immersed in it, or because of your father being in the business, has it always been, because I think for a lot of us growing up, like when I was a kid, I got into wrestling when I was, say, 7 or 8 years old. There was a long time where it was this larger than life industry before I became older, and then you understand the personalities and it becomes more of a business. But to you, did you ever have that period where you were kind of sucked into the escapist world of it, or was it always like, oh, this is what my dad does? And
no, it's, you know what, I never even thought about it till you just posed that question. You see a bunch of the guys especially the guys that definitely aren't second generation, but they always have like a light bulb moment. Like they're watching TV when they're 6 or 7 and they're flipping the channels.
Yeah.
And they come across wrestling and they're like, what's this? And then they watch it and then they're hooked. I never had that moment because, like I said, it's the family business. And in our house, if it was a wrestling night, wrestling was on, even if it was just background noise. So I never had like a moment where I was like, wait, what's that? And then got immersed into it. It was just always there. It was always normal.
And would it be on, or would it be it's on, but your dad is kind of analysing it as it goes? Like, were you learning about it from a young age in terms of what goes into a match and the setup and what good looks like?
Oh, well, yeah. What's the language parameters on your show?
Go for it.
Well, when I was young, he would just be like, God, that was the shits, or this, or God, that was fucking terrible. But I was like, okay. Those conversations didn't come until later, until after I watched the match at 25 and I knew, I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. Then about 13, 14, 15, we were watching and I was learning more about like, okay, I see what he did there. Okay, why he did that. Okay. And then I would ask questions to my dad while we were watching, and he would kind of look at me with like a side eye, like, why are you asking all these questions? Like, what's your angle here? Like, why do you ask? So I would kind of pick his brain. I was like, hey, did you see him do that? Why did he do that? And what sense does that make? And he would explain why it did or didn't. So those conversations came later, but not when I was like 8 or 9. I was just sitting there watching.
I mean, you've described the challenges of being part of a wrestling family and the sacrifices that your dad's having to make and the sacrifices that in turn you're making as a child. Was there a reticence from your dad for you to enter the industry? And did you have any question marks about whether it was a lifestyle that you wanted to get into because of your experiences as a kid?
Yeah, he didn't have to explain. I mean, he missed birthdays, he missed football games, he missed wrestling meets, he missed Christmases sometimes. Thanksgiving, he might have to peel out at 2:30. Yeah, trust me, I understand firsthand what he had to do. I wasn't on the road, but I experienced that he wasn't here. And it's not a boohoo story. I understood why he was on the road. I always have. I understood what he was doing. He was providing for our family. Completely understand. So he didn't really have to tell me any of that. I kind of already knew that when I was getting into this. But if I had a kid by now, I think the conversation would have been much different. If I had a small child, he probably would have really been like, think wisely about what you're doing. Because he had a very small kid when he was pounding the roads for Crockett. So he knows he missed a bunch of his life. So he knows what that can do. But I think just given my current situation, he was like, if you're going to do this, you have to be all in. There's no half-ass. You have to go for it if you really want to do it, because it takes every fiber of your being if you really want to do this.
Yeah. It's a lifestyle unlike anything else, really, isn't it? Pro wrestling. I think it's often overlooked from people that aren't in the business, just how much ground you have to cover and how little time you get with your family and how out of sync that balance is.
Yeah, I think to the fans, they don't harp on it. They're just like, we're going, wrestling's in town tonight. We're going to go to wrestling. And then they go watch the matches and they see everything. Like, that was a good show. And they don't think about anything logistically about where you were the previous night and where you're going to be in 3 hours. They don't think about it. They don't think about you having to be there the night before, check into your hotel, maybe get 5 hours, 6 hours of sleep, nip up. If you do go to the gym, you got to get that sweat early. You probably got to wake up, get at yourself for another hour and a half before you can be ready to go to the gym. You go gym, come back, shower, grab your bag, go to the building. Then it's just a bunch of sit and wait, and then have the match, and then leave there. If you got a flight out that night, depending on where you live, you might have to go to the airport right then to catch a red eye back to the West Coast or to the East Coast, depending on where you're at, or go back to the hotel room, not sleep a wink because you're running on adrenaline, nip up the next morning, do the same thing, catch a flight back home. And it's just nonstop. I don't think anybody thinks about that. It's like you live, you're like half. I was trying to think of like a sport that maybe can sympathize with it. Maybe baseball. Baseball plays 162 games a year, so their travel schedule's got to be ridiculous. Basketball players are on the road a lot. It's kind of like you're part athlete, part truck driver. You got
even all of those they have off seasons, don't they?
Yeah,
which is for one thing. Wrestling is. I always struggle with wrestling over the holidays. I always, whenever I see that a show is running on Christmas Day or Boxing Day, I personally, as a fan, I've always thought, why is that necessary? Like, A, I can't imagine going to see a wrestling show on Christmas Day with my family.
Yeah.
But B, I've always thought, why can't wrestlers just have 2 weeks off over Christmas? Like, no one needs wrestling over Christmas. I'll probably upset some people by saying that listening to the show, but I think no one needs fresh wrestling over Christmas. I think that's a Christmas, New Year, at least give talent 2 weeks off. That can just be play the best of 2023 or whatever, a couple of roundup shows, Christmas classics, because everyone's got too much to do over Christmas anyway. No one needs 10 hours of fresh wrestling content over Christmas week. And that for me would be the obvious time. If you're going to give that, as an industry, just say, right, 2 weeks off, Christmas, New Year, actually have a break, be with your families, recharge, get ready for January. Because that's what everyone else is doing in business. That's the irony, is most of those people sitting at home are on holiday over Christmas.
Maybe the last time that ever I will give them credit on this. Maybe the last time this ever happens in the business. We were doing the COVID tapings for AEW, and we were doing them every 2 weeks. And so you had all that time off, which was good. But also when we were done and the rumor was, all right, we're about to go back on the road. We're about to start running live shows. They did give us about a week and a half off right then before we were about to gear up and start hitting the road, which I thought was pretty unique. I don't think WWE had that going.
I would imagine, but COVID, because obviously you entered, you have the disadvantage that you arrived in AEW during that pandemic era with the strange setup of the minimal crowds. But I imagine for a lot of talent who've been doing this for a long time that the pandemic must have been a bit of a strange reset time, and that especially in AEW, filming from the same location in Florida every week for such a long period. I'd imagine for a lot of talent, it was the first time in years that they'd been like, wow, we can kind of stay in the same place and, not be on the road all the time.
It was refreshing. We went to the same hotel I was there for February to, when did we start running? About August, September, maybe. Your memory might be better than mine. It might have been September, but they'd been doing that another whole year before I got there. So my dad was going every 2 weeks down there. They'd be in the same hotel, ran the Daly's place. It was really easy from that sense, from a logistics point. Jacksonville Airport was very easy to get into, very easy to get out of. Direct flight to Charlotte. Went to the same hotel every 2 weeks, trained at the same gym every 2 weeks, and then went to Daly's. It became easy in that sense because you never had to worry about getting there or panicking, trying to pull up your GPS, trying to find the building or the hotel or the gym. You knew where everything was. So it was very easy from that sense. But I think during the whole different spin on it, I'm glad it wasn't too long of a stretch that I was down there for COVID, because I saw people do it and I heard veterans talk about it. I think there was a lot of opportunities to pick up bad habits during COVID with the ability to stop and start, if you know what I mean. If something happened in the match that they didn't like, they could just cut the tape and then redo it. And that happened a couple times, and I heard veterans say, that's the most outlandish thing I've ever seen in my life. What's going to happen when that happens in front of a live crowd? You can't just stop and start.
Yeah, well, you used to hear stories about that at old kind of WWF tapings in the early '90s, how a finish wouldn't go right, and they'd just replay the whole thing in front of a live crowd so that they could get it on tape. I can't even imagine what that must be like. I can't think of a specific instance, but I've heard of that a few times where they would redo over the finish so that they could capture it for home video.
Believe it or not, my dad told me one time. It's funny you said that. My dad told me one time when he was up there, he saw it was, I think, actually Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart. So you know how many matches they had. And
number quality.
Yeah. And I guess there was a certain spot or a certain finish that had to go exactly the same way. And it might have not went that way, but it still got the job done. They came back. He said Vince sent them right back. They waited a match, had the match, and then right after sent them back out, did the exact same match in front of the crowd, which is bananas.
Yeah, just imagine being in the crowd. But what is happening? Well, you're probably happy because you get another Bret Hart Mr. Perfect match, which no one's going to complain about. But
especially in '89, you're like, what is going on right now?
Crazy, the crazy business of pro wrestling.
Oh God.
So tell me about your journey into it then, Brock. So what was your training like? I know that you had training, Lodi and QT Marshall and John Schuyler. It was a lot of very experienced veterans that have helped get you to AEW. Tell me about your training.
So I wanted to do this out of high school. I had told my parents, I was like, there's no reason for me to go to college. Like, this is what I want to do. I don't want to have an office job or sit in a cubicle or work construction or anything like that. This is what I want to do. Just let me go to Japan or whatever. Let me start on the indies, something. And my dad, I think, was probably 25 or 30% sold on it. Like, it was like, he was kind of like, no, but maybe. Because I asked your mom, and then I asked my mom.
Did he push you to get an education? Did he say, yes, but you've got to go to college? Or what was his?
He said that, but I think he could have been swayed a little bit on it. Like, it made sense. He was like, if that's what he's going to do, he might as well just go. But he's kind of like, ask your mom. And I asked my mom, and then she's like, absolutely not. Like, you're going to school, and then we'll talk when you get that piece of paper. So I went to school, and even at school, I told all my buddies, I was like, senior year came around, and everybody's graduating, and they're like, so, like, what do you got, any interviews lined up? Like, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to wrestle. And some of them be like, you're going to what? I'm like, going to wrestle, even though they knew where I came from and like who my dad was. They're still like, what? Like, they didn't believe it was a real avenue. Like, people did that. They're like, okay, whatever. Some of them were like, that's great, and just kind of blew me off. And some of them were like, okay, yeah, we'll see. So I get that piece of paper December of 2019. I got it. The second I got it, I was like, all right, we got to find a place to train. January 2020, there was two places in Charlotte. George South had a place, but he had a bunch of students. And then Lodi from WCW, The Flock, he had a ring 10, 15 minutes up the road. And it was a much more controlled environment, less students. And I thought it was a better place for me to get more reps early and develop rather than be part of a 30, 40 person class and maybe get skimped on the reps. So I chose Lodi, and it was the best decision I made in my development. Lodi is a great wrestling trainer for the basics. He understands the basics of the business, logic of it. And on top of that, he is an even better person. And the guys he's come across in the past, like you mentioned, John Schuyler, who you've had on your program, he helped John out in an early stage. So John was living just down the road. He would come up, and he'd been in the business 10 years, 11 years at this point. So it was good. The only way you get better in this business is to wrestle people better than you. So you can wrestle the same guys on your level in training all you want. You can feel like a superstar when you got it down with guys you train with 3-4 times a week, because they know your movements and everything. But once you get a guy in there and it becomes live action and a whole different, and a veteran, he really helped me a lot in that process. Him, and he brought his partner, Brady Pierce, and there's other guys that I'm leaving out. I can't remember. C.W. Anderson came down a couple times, who I'm tagging with now. And just these guys from the Carolinas that had runs on TV, and they'd been around and they'd wrestled for 15, 20 years. Having those guys come help me early was a great asset to have early in that career, early in that stage.
This episode of Wrestling Life is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Legacy Sports Nutrition. Take your physical and mental performance to the next level with Test X9, the natural testosterone booster. Clinically proven, Test X9 from Legacy Sports Nutrition is NSF certified, third-party lab tested, and made in the US of A. And it's brought to you by friends of the show, 3-time world champion Nick Aldis and 10-time world champion Mickie James. Nick developed and uses these products himself, so you know they work, and he shows you how over at legacysubs.com, with links to clinical studies on each of the 9 key ingredients. No bull, no bro science, just facts. It's time to level up your strength, energy, libido and drive now with Test X9 from Legacy Sports Nutrition. And if you want to really level up, go for the ultimate test stack, adding T-Assist, a pro-grade estrogen inhibitor and test enhancer, and the best-selling sleep aid Recovery PM, and discover why improving your sleep is the key to unlocking your mental and physical potential. So stop settling for average. Go to legacysubs.com now and use the promo code WrestlingLife for 10% off your entire order. That's promo code WrestlingLife. And if you subscribe to have it shipped every 30 days, you can still get the discount every single time. So head on over now to legacysubs.com and level up with Legacy. Yeah, it's I guess, you know, it's that foundation, isn't it? It's what you pick up in the early days is so instrumental. Like when you've mentioned a lot about reps, and you've talked about your time in AEW. When it comes to opponents, who have you learnt the most from in terms of veterans in the ring that you faced?
John Schuyler's definitely up there. I've wrestled him a few times on independent shows. I think down in Georgia, here in the Carolinas, I've wrestled him a few times. He's always great. He works more our style. He's not a flip-flop guy. You won't see him diving through the ropes. He's ground and pound. So learning from a guy like that always helps. I have wrestled and been in the locker room with probably the best tag team in the world right now, FTR, Carolina guys. So we speak the same language. They're huge fans of my dad and Tully, and then the Midnight, and they based like all their wrestling style off that 80s Crockett, which, I mean, we had the VHS tapes at my house, so I've watched all that, so I can sympathize with them. And I love that style. You won't see them do any wasted movement. Everything they do makes sense. They put on a wrestling match. There's no just moves for moves. There's no dives, nothing like that. So I wrestled them, I think 3 times with 3 different partners. Every time I learned something new. I got to tag and be around Dustin Rhodes. That was a wealth of information, you know,
Yeah,
4 decades in the business, you know, Father Dusty, guys like that. I tried to value the outside the ring. I tried to value the veterans in the back's opinion more than some of the others in the locker room, as it's been documented. But, you know, Dean Malenko's, Dustin, Jerry Lynn, Billy Gunn, all the vets in a Big Show, and Mark Henry, even though they're big guys and they work a completely different style, they might know something that you should do just from their perspective of just being in the business for 20 years. Just the veterans in the back, I thought it was important to listen to.
Well, the thing that unites them all is that they've all got over, haven't they? In their very different ways, very different people. They've all got over. That was when I spoke to John Schuyler on this show. That was the one thing he said to me. The one bit of advice: get over. Find your way to get over.
Yeah,
and you know, all of them have done that, and 10 times in their career, haven't they? Through different personas and different stages of their life. Look at someone like the Big Show. The amount of kind of character changes he's gone through over 25 years, 30 years. It's incredible.
You think about Jericho. Jericho might be the best to ever do it. He's recreated himself, 6 times?
Oh, yeah.
6 different things. He might be the best to ever in that facet of recreating himself.
I agree. I mean, I think he's someone who will never sit on his laurels, will he? He's every couple of years, it's a new character. It's incredible to watch.
So you got to tip your hat to him. He's probably the best in that facet of just recreating himself and staying relevant and keeping up with the times.
You mentioned having lots of old VHS tapes around. At what point was it that you started? Because obviously you were born when your dad had already hung up the boots, and then growing up, he's an agent for WWE. You're not seeing him in the ring. At what point was it that you started to go back, I assume, with him and start to learn about your dad as a wrestler and what made him special?
So I would pop in the VHS tapes from time to time, but they were always terrible quality. They had that string of static going up to the top and running the whole screen. And they were very terrible quality. So I'd watch them, but you really didn't get anything from them. So I think when the network came out, probably was really when I started watching back, going through most of them because they were higher quality, everything from Crockett, everything from him and Ole in the rock and roll to him and Tully with all the guys they wrestled with, the Horseman era, WCW era, even matches with him and Larry tagging, I loved, which that's a tag partner you don't think about with it. My dad tagged with so many guys, and I think they were all in their own unique way good tag teams. I mean, him and Bobby Eaton, I think, tagged just for a minute, and that's 2 of the best tag team wrestlers ever, which is nuts that they only had maybe a 3-month run as tag partners. Imagine if they would have kept going. But yeah, going through all that on the network. So I'm bad with the math, but maybe 14, 15.
When you kind of decided to enter the business and you were coming into AEW, was it your decision? Was it a conscious decision to be Brock Anderson, or did you consider I want to be distant from my dad? And what was the thought process behind packaging yourself as your father's son essentially in this industry?
2 things. With this face, I don't know if I could get away with being, Bartholomew McGillicuddy. I don't know if that would work. So that was kind of already against me. And the Anderson name has such a lineage, I don't know if anybody knows this or not, but it's not our legitimate last name. There was actually an Anderson. Gene Anderson's the legitimate Anderson. Gene, Lars, Ole, my dad, CW, me, countless others who have used this name, and it's instant brand recognition. When you see that name, you know what you're getting. It's ground and pound.
Wasn't your dad's name influenced by Ole? Am I right in saying they were put together as a team, and that was what precipitated your dad's name?
So there was a story there. He was working as his legitimate name, Marty Lundy, down in Mid-South for Bill Watts. And they were just sitting around the locker room, and he was about to go to Georgia, I think. And they were trying to figure out, Ole needed somebody else. They were sending Matt Bourne from the Rat Pack up there, and they needed somebody else. And Bill Watts was looking around, and I think JYD of all people piped up, and he was like, Bill, send Lundy up with him. He looks just like Joe, or send Lundy up, make him an Anderson. He looks just like Ole. And Bill was like, that's a great idea, JYD. And he got on the horn and he sent my dad up. And from there, he never looked back, just simply off resemblance.
Amazing. One moment that changed a career in many ways.
You're not kidding.
Yeah. So look, we asked this at the start, but we're kind of circling back now. 2023, end of 2023. You've had you've had a couple of years of AEW. You're now looking next. What are you hoping for in the next year or so, Brock? What's your game plan as you stand now?
I think not thinking super big, just like I have to be with another contract company. I almost kind of want to do it like I always respected the guys before there was AEW or anything, before there was that backup plan. I respected the guys. Like the first one I remember doing it was Cody. When Cody left, he was like, all right, here's a list of guys I want to wrestle. Let's make it happen. And he just booked all these like super mega independent shows with all these guys he wanted to work with. And then I saw, after he did it, I saw Woo Woo did it. I saw Zack Ryder do it. And look where he's at now. He controls his own destiny. He don't have to go anywhere. He can wrestle anywhere, anytime, any place that he wants to. So I think something like that is more what I'm inclined to. Just nothing. Don't be obligated to anything, but just go out there and see what's out there. Try and wrestle for as many companies as you can, many places, many markets as you can. Try to wrestle guys that you've always wanted to wrestle.
And it's that old kind of territory days, isn't it? To try and work different markets, different crowd, different promotions, tweak your character, all that kind of stuff.
Because with a lack of, well, not even a lack, there is no territories left. That's the closest thing I think you could get, is just working as many dates as you possibly can in different places, different companies across the stretch of a calendar year.
Do you have any dream opponents that you'd love to step in the ring with?
That's tough. If the math could work, he said the other night he wanted 10 more years. If the math could work, Randy Orton. He was probably number 2 on my favorite. It was Shawn and then Randy, because Randy was that style and he's second generation and he had the look. And I was a huge mark for the Legend Killer gimmick when he's just RKO and Legends every week.
Yep.
Randy would probably be up there.
And man, he's just come back at Survivor Series looking the best he's ever looked at 43.
Oh, he looks immaculate.
Incredible.
Yeah. So if that math works out, if it really is 10 more years, yes, Randy.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he's got 10 years in him, judging by how he's going now.
I hope so. I sure hope so. He's one of my favorites, and I think he's definitely one of the best they got and one of the best they maybe ever have had.
Yeah, and he's also, very much of, talking about kind of the era of your dad. Like, he's very much old school in his mentality and his psychology and his match style, isn't he? He's very much a second generation student of the game, third generation even, isn't he? Like, student of the game. And I think he still brings a very refreshing style, I think, to that WWE product even now.
To tell you what a small world it is, my dad worked very closely with him at WWE. His dad, Bob Orton Jr., was my dad's favorite when he was just like a fan at like 14, 15 in Rome. It was Bob Orton Jr. and Dick Slater were a tag team in Georgia.
Right.
And that was my dad's shit. He thought they were the bee's knees. He thought they were awesome. He thought they were kick-ass guys. And he was their favorite, which tells you how small the world it is. And then he ended up working with his son years later.
Yeah, crazy. And I'm sure Randy Orton, you were saying about some of the, the veterans now thinking, oh, wow, Brock Anderson's now wrestling with us. I'm sure there was a lot of that WWE locker room who saw Randy around a lot as a kid in the 80s and 90s. And then suddenly, oh wow, he's our world champion. Like that must have been pretty trippy.
Oh, yeah.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, Brock, is I always like to end the show with a bit of advice for people who are maybe starting out or just entering the industry. I think when I ask you that, it's a bit more interesting because I'm kind of interested. What advice has your dad given you that stood you in good stead? But also, what have you learnt from being second generation in terms of maybe mistakes to avoid on the path into wrestling?
So on the training aspect, you take it with a grain of salt because, like I said, people are going to find ways to not listen to you. They'll be like, oh, what does he know about training? I'm sure he just walked in the door with a job. Find places that are good with good trainers, people who know what they're talking about, especially in this line of business. I know a lot of people that just went to a school that some guy had been wrestling 20 years, but he maybe had 300 matches over those 20 years. He just did it on the weekends, every second weekend, and they didn't really know what they're talking about. Go to somewhere, not just because it's geographically close. Go somewhere where you think you're going to get better. I mean, there's OVW, there's Tom Pritchard in Knoxville, Tennessee. Ricky Morton has a school in East Tennessee. I mean, that's the greatest babyface of all time. George South had a school here. I don't know what his situation is. He was always a very good school. I think the Monster Factory, I don't know a lot about them, but they seem to churn out a lot of people. Go somewhere where there's a track record and there's people that know what they're doing. Don't go somewhere just because it's down the road, because you might never get out of that rut. As far as what my dad said to me, just make everything make sense. Don't do things just to do them. Put them in a way that a regular person can understand. Convey them so that when a guy's watching, he'd be like, okay, that makes sense. I understand why he did that. Or so it elicits the reaction that you want. Don't just dive through the ropes just to get one pop, because once it's over, it's like, okay, now what? Because you see guys, especially at AEW, and I'm scared for them because I think there's going to be a long injury list. They do things, I think, just to do them. And that's how people get hurt. And when you're not able to walk at 35, are you going to be sitting there looking back? You're like, God, I'm really glad I did all those dives, because nobody else is going to be paying your bills. Nobody else is going to be paying, your phone bill, your light bill, your gas bill. Are you really, you have to be smart in how you approach this, because it's about it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
It's interesting. I wonder how many people have taken away. I've heard Hulk Hogan doing the interview circuit recently and saying if he could change one thing about his career, it would have been not doing the leg drop as his finishing move for 35 years. And why didn't he just do the sleeper?
Yeah, for his back.
And for everyone, for his tailbone. And, for all of these talents, it's not just in AEW, it's across the board, but who are doing, pile drivers on the side of a ring apron and all that kind of stuff, which looks incredible. But as a I've been watching this for 35 years as someone who grew up with the slow plodding WWF product. I watch it now and it's almost like white noise to me. It doesn't impress me. It just makes me go, oh, I hope he's okay. I don't want the reason I watch and love professional wrestling and not MMA or boxing is because I like to think people genuinely aren't injuring themselves for life and are being protected as much as is possible within the confines of the world that it is. And I never want to watch it and think, oh, that looks like they genuinely landed on their head, because they probably did land on their head.
I think you just nailed it on the head without even thinking about it. That spot, you see, it's an evolution. It's always somebody does something and then they're like, oh, okay. And then somebody has to top it. So when I was at AEW, I think the next thing they thought was to top everything was a spot on that wide apron we have, because it was about a 2-foot apron. So they see that, they're like, that's enough for a pile driver. That's enough for a moonsault off the top onto somebody. The average fan doesn't know that part of the ring is the hardest part of the ring. Some fans think it's all a trampoline anyway. So you're not conveying what you think you're conveying in that moment. And then even if you are, once you've done it so much, it's just like you said, it becomes white noise. It's just becomes another move when you're doing that kind of damage on your body. Which I
remember, I think it was Kevin Owens did it to Sami Zayn at like the culmination of their NXT feud, maybe going back 8 or 9 years, did the pile driver on the side of a ring apron. And that was like, Sami Zayn out for months. That was like the big spot. And now you can see that and someone's getting back in the ring at a count of 5. And it's like, unfortunately, it's a bit like you used to see like the DDT was a finisher in Jake Roberts' day. Now it's just a transitional move. It's those. It's very easy, I think, to kind of, I don't know what a right term is really, but just kind of make these big spots become less meaningful the more you do them, and that's what kind of concerns me.
You're exactly right. That's the disconnect between the old timers and the new generation. Is my dad always uses the term. He'll see a big spot like that, and he'll be like, that used to be a stretcher job. If somebody hit that, they'd be off TV for 3 months. And they'd be walking around in public with a cast or a neck brace or something. They hit that spot and then they kick out at 1.5. That's the disconnect, is making these moves mean. It's all perception. If you do all that and then kick out at 1.5, they're like, oh, this is a bunch of baloney. If you do it and make it mean something, they're like, oh, God, shit, he might actually be hurt. which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to convey that he might be in danger, not actually put yourself in danger.
Yeah, I had Shah Samuels on the phone, and he was saying to me on this show a few weeks ago, he was saying, everything we do in the ring hurts. So why are we trying to make it look like it doesn't hurt? Because this is painful. This is a painful business. Nothing about this business doesn't hurt our bodies. So why are we trying to look like Superman and trying to jump 10 spots a minute like nothing's affecting us? Because all you're doing there is you're doing a disservice to yourself and the fans.
You feel a simple scoop slam the next morning. Imagine doing that 3 or 4 times and then everything else on top of that. Yeah, that's what I've taken from my dad. He's very, very careful in that. He's like, don't do anything just to do it. You won't ever see me going off the top really for anything, maybe one time, but you won't see me diving out onto the floor, diving through the ropes. None of that. No moonsaults for this guy.
Yeah.
Ground and pound. Keep everything in the ring.
Love it. So look, how can my audience, anyone who's listening today who isn't following you already, Brock, what are your socials and how can people keep up to date with you?
So let me see what that is. It is still, I have not changed the handle yet, but Brock Anderson AEW on Instagram, all lowercase. And then B Anderson AEW on Twitter.
Okay.
Have not changed those yet. They probably will change in the near future, but for right now, those are the handles.
Well, I'm really honoured to have had this conversation with you today. I've loved following your journey so far, and I'm really excited to see what comes next. And I hope we can do this again in a year or two when you've torn up the independent scene and you're on to the next chapter.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you having me on today. This was fun.
Thanks, Brock.
Thank you, Ben.
So that's it for another Wrestling Life. Thank you to my guest, Brock Anderson. Thank you to my producer, Jeff Easton from Tall Lake Productions, for bringing Wrestling Life to life. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us. We'll be back very soon with more real talk from real talent. Until then, be good to each other. See ya.